Hello, and thank you for joining us here at the First Alert Desk. I'm Maria Moreau. I'm joined here by my friend and colleague Tim Darnell. Here we're talking about something that's on a lot of Georgians' minds and a lot of those in the political world, the governor's race. Now, the first debate here in Georgia is going to kick off tonight at 7 p.m. Conveniently the same day as early voting starts, so these politicians and candidates, they are in the final run to get votes for their seat. Primarily, we're talking about Governor Brian Kemp, Stacey Abrams, who are going to be debating tonight. I wanted to bring you on. You have been involved in Atlanta's political climate, just covering it as a journalist for some years now. Wanted you to weigh in on tonight's debate, but also what voters can expect in the final weeks leading up to November 8th.
Yeah, and Maria, Georgia's historic governor's race is really entering its final weeks. This is arguably the most anticipated, the most watched governor's race in the nation for a lot of reasons. We're going to see in just a few short weeks just how strong the Democratic Party's resurgence in Georgia really has been. 4 years ago, Stacey Abrams and Brian Kemp ran for governor, and Stacey Abrams came within only a few thousand votes, 55,000 approximately, of actually becoming the first, not only Georgia's first Democratic governor of the 21st century, but also the nation's first African-American female governor in U.S. history. Coming that close, it was almost a given that she was going to try it again. However, there are a lot of differences between what we're seeing now and what happened 4 years ago. We're in an entirely different political climate. Governor Kemp has a 4-year track record of mostly popular, generally popular, at least among conservative Republican voters, which is his base. And Stacey Abrams has been out of office since 2017. She has built up a national following, has a national reputation, an excellent fundraiser, has raised really more money than Brian Kemp in his re-election campaign, and yet is still trailing and has been trailing most of the summer and into the early fall by virtually every poll. The most recent one being last week, she's trailing by 10 points. So you look at tonight's debate, whether or not debates actually make a difference is kind of irrelevant at this point. Stacey Abrams needs to make a good solid impact tonight and in her second debate, which is October 30th, against Governor Brian Kemp, also at 7 p.m. So she's going to really, I think, need to make a lot of very solid arguments why voters should really fire mostly generally popular 4-year incumbent, which doesn't happen that often here in Georgia or nationwide, and hire a Democratic challenger such as herself.
And let's talk about that. So as we gear up to watch this debate tonight, of course, a lot of the focus is going to be on campaign promises and what each candidate stands for. What have we seen out of this race, and what are their main platforms at this point?
Their main platforms are visible for everyone to see on every TV station, local and national. Both campaigns have just bombarded the airwaves. Stacey Abrams attacking Brian Kemp on the 6-week abortion ban that he supported, attacking Governor Kemp on repealing Georgia's concealed carry laws, arguably or alleging that he has made Georgia less safe. Jill Biden, First Lady Jill Biden, was in Atlanta on Friday with Stacey Abrams arguing that Kemp's policies are bad for Georgia. Kemp, on the other hand, will do everything that he can, as he has been doing throughout the campaign so far, to tie Stacey Abrams to President Joe Biden. The increasingly unpopular economic decisions that are causing inflation and perhaps rising gas prices here in Georgia. He has tied Abrams to even calling the current economic climate the Biden-Abrams economy. So, and Stacey Abrams is a huge supporter of President Biden and his policies. So that's what we're going to see more and more of tonight. It was interesting. On Friday, Stacey Abrams did an interview, an exclusive interview with Fox Digital, in which she accused Brian Kemp of bringing companies, Chinese in nature, Chinese headquartered companies, more of their investment into Georgia, thereby perhaps exposing more Georgians to Chinese surveillance techniques. So she might bring that up tonight. That's an allegation that we haven't heard so far. Whether or not bringing international politics and geopolitical concerns into the governor's race, if that's a wise move, we'll see if she follows up on it tonight.
And let's talk a little bit about what we saw out of the Senate debate last week. It certainly is fair to say, and maybe you can disagree, that the way that political debates are handled nowadays are very much not the same as what we saw maybe 10, 20 years ago. Is there a certain forecast we can make just by watching the conversation between Walker and Raphael Warnock, of course, that we can expect out of Abrams and Kemp tonight?
I think so. I think we will see more of a stricter party alignment, whereas Raphael Warnock is seemingly, at least as far as his ads are concerned, is seemingly really making an effort to bring traditional Republican voters into his camp because of Herschel Walker's personal issues, however you may feel of them. In tonight's debate, I don't think that you're going to see very many personal attacks. It's going to be strictly along party alignment. Georgia is a heavily divided partisan state. 45% of the state's voters can be reliably depended on to vote Democratic. The other 45, reliable Republican. Stacey Abrams is counting on that middle 10% that may lean one way or the other, and she'll use these emotional arguments and connections that people have, positions on things like abortion, concealed carry, whether or not Georgia is actually the quote-unquote worst place to live, as she did go on record as saying several months ago. Brian Kemp will point to his record as a strong Republican conservative that led the state during a pandemic and now has a booming economy that is really hitting on all all cylinders, I should say. Abrams has got to be able to convince voters that Brian Kemp's policies are bad for Georgia. That might be a little bit of a tough row to hoe, given the strong economic numbers that Georgia is enjoying so far.
And while we have this conversation, if you have any questions, maybe your own thoughts, and what you're expecting out of tonight's debate, drop them below. We are checking these comments as we talk about this. So let's get into a little bit more of this debate. This is the first of what's going to be two debates, the second one on October 30th. And from what we're hearing, former President Barack Obama is actually supposed to stop by on October 28th.
Right.
Is that really going to impact the debate we can expect on October 30th? Is that going to change the conversation in any way?
It might change the conversation in the fact that obviously Stacey Abrams is hoping that Barack Obama, the most beloved figure by far in the National Democratic Party, there's no name bigger, no name more beloved by many, many Americans on both sides of the political aisle. I question the timing a little bit. Maybe it was just an issue of scheduling, but if I'm going to bring in the nation's most popular figure in my political party, why would I want to do that the weekend or 2 weekends before voters actually go to the polls? Brian Kemp really would not be well advised to try to tie Stacey Abrams to Barack Obama simply because he's such a popular, beloved figure among Democrats and among some Republicans. If I am trying to mobilize and inspire my voter base to go to the polls, this race is all going to be completely based on turnout. Maybe I would want to schedule Barack Obama to hit the campaign trail with me the weekend before voting begins. Why would you want to do it that earlier, or a little bit early before voting day? There are obviously a lot of things that we may not be privy to. Maybe it was just an issue of scheduling, but we'll see how much of an influence that will have on the October 30th debate.
Now, and I ask you this as somebody who's been close to reporting on and examining the political climate here in Georgia, we are obviously probably not going to expect Kemp to pull out his own former president of his party at this point, but we do look at the numbers, and Kemp is currently leading, even by a little bit. Is there something to be said about him pulling ahead by involving a significant Republican figure, or is he good to go where he is trailing ahead exactly as he's doing?
If I were Brian Kemp, I would do everything in my power to prevent or not to be featured in a Donald Trump rally.
Right.
Kemp has so far distanced himself from the former president. We all know that Trump encouraged former U.S. Senator David Perdue to challenge Kemp in the primary. Brian Kemp trounced David Perdue. It wasn't even close. Well over 50% of the vote. That was one of the first races that we called on during the May 24th primary a few months ago. If I were Democrats, I would pay to bring Donald Trump into the state of Georgia. The last thing Brian Kemp really needs is for a Donald Trump campaign appearance in Georgia. However, Burt Jones, who is the favorite right now to become Georgia's next lieutenant governor, and Herschel Walker, who is engaged in just a bitterly personal, razor-thin, virtually tied race to become the next U.S. Senator here in Georgia. Both of those candidates have enjoyed Donald Trump's endorsement. Do they bring the former president into Georgia? If he does, if I were Brian Kemp, I would be staying away from that stage and hoping that any lingering resentment regarding the 2020 presidential election is not brought up.
And let's talk about the voter for a minute. Early voting, of course, has began. A lot of people are already making their voices heard about how they feel about each of these gubernatorial candidates. I'm a voter. I'm going to watch the debate tonight. What are some things that I should be asking myself or looking out for as I choose between these two candidates?
Look out for policies and their positions that affect individual, ordinary Georgians, such as ourselves. Taxes, inflation. Every poll has shown so far that economy, the inflation, rising gas prices are by far the number one issue in this race. Much more than abortion, much more than concealed carry, much more than any allegations of voter suppression or intimidation or purging of voter rolls. Those are things that Stacey Abrams has really based her campaign on, and yet they're not resonating with a lot of Georgians. All politics is local. What former U.S. House Speaker Tip O'Neill famously said, you can talk about overall philosophies, threats to democracy, things like that. Those issues really aren't resonating this year. We have an unpopular president, by and large, here in Georgia, who is implementing policies that some people are supporting and yet others are not. Different polls show differing levels of support on President Biden's economic and infrastructure plan. These are things that Stacey Abrams really needs to hit first and hard on if she's going to close this right now what is an 8 to 10 point gap, and that could be even larger very soon between now and Election Day.
And we, of course, can't predict what the outcome of this election is going to be. But I think in previous conversation, we talked about statistically the chances of outseating a current sitting governor, not very high.
Not very high.
Is that a trend that we can expect? I mean, based on what we're seeing currently, or has the pendulum been swung in Stacey Abrams' favor and given her a running chance?
Stacey Abrams certainly feels and is hoping that the pendulum has swung. However, Brian Kemp is cruising on a 100% firing on all cylinders statewide economy There's a budgetary surplus. Georgia is in strong shape financially. Consistently for the past 9 years has been ranked as tops, if not the number one state in which corporations can do business, and is attracting to coming within the state's borders. The last time a sitting governor was unseated in Georgia running for re-election was Democrat Roy Barnes in 2000, when he was ousted by then state legislators, former state lawmaker Sonny Perdue. It was an absolutely perfect storm. Those are the kind of things that you have to have happen for an incumbent to be unseated. Kemp has had no personal controversies. We can debate all day about his positions on gun control, on taxes, on abortion or some other controversial social issues. But by and large, people are going to vote, especially during a midterm election in which a sitting president's party typically and historically has done very poorly. I think we can look forward to seeing the same thing happen in a few weeks here in Georgia.
And let's talk about the national attention this has caught. Of course, the Senate race here in Georgia has the whole nation watching for what it's going to do to the federal government. I mean,
Right.
to the state of Congress as it stands. But this gubernatorial debate, is it catching the same amount of attention as that Senate race?
I think it's catching a lot of national attention simply because Stacey Abrams has such a national profile and has built a very formidable war chest with a great many out-of-state contributions. So Hollywood, New York, you can argue that those communities have a lot invested in her campaign simply because she did so well and ran such a strong campaign 4 years ago. In 2019, she delivered the Democratic Party's response to President Trump's first State of the Union address. Universally high marks for everything that she delivered that evening, and has been mentioned and has been very open about her future national political ambitions. You can expect Brian Kemp to hit her very hard tonight and throughout until November 8th on Election Day for these national implications and her national ambitions, and whether or not she simply wants to use Georgia's governor's mansion as a stepping stone to a higher national profile.
And this gubernatorial debate is going to kick off at 7 o'clock. We are actually going to have a full analysis and our crews on the ground reporting on this debate throughout the night. Tim, I want to thank you so much. And
Thank
of course,
you for having me.
Any final thoughts? I mean, as you talk to these early voters who are casting their decision right now.
Look at the candidates' platforms. Both candidates, every candidate for all of the major statewide races have very thorough, very well thought out policy platforms. Take the time to learn about the candidates, what their positions are, but most importantly, regardless of who you vote for, every vote counts. Every election we've seen over the past several years decided by only marginally just a handful of voters. Your vote counts. Don't ever believe that it doesn't count, and go to the polls.
And of course, we're going to have more information and analysis on our website, atlantanewsfirst.com.